The briefing room aboard the galactic consensus vessel Unbroken Meridian had hosted thousands of first contact orientations. Species from 47 star systems had sat in the curved reception chair and received the standard welcome package. Translated, culturally calibrated, delivered with the precise blend of authority and reassurance that the consensus had spent 2 centuries perfecting. None of them had ever interrupted on slide 3. "Predators," said the human, leaning forward in the chair. "You said predators rule the galaxy." Ambassador Darien of the Vel, tall, silver-skinned, with the carefully composed expression of a diplomat who had navigated 3 interstellar wars without raising his voice, nodded patiently. "The dominant species of the galactic consensus are, by biological classification, apex predators. Yes, we felt it important to establish this early, so that your species might understand the natural order, as it were, of—" "Which ones?" Darien paused. "I beg your pardon." "The human." Her name was Lyra. She was the first official human envoy to the consensus, and she had been awake for 31 hours due to the translation of her transit jump. Tilted her head with an expression Darien could not immediately classify. It was not fear. He was very familiar with fear. It was not aggression. He had seen that too, in the early orientations of the Krethval and the Son. It was something more like a scientist noticing an unexpected variable. "Which predators?" she asked. "What do they hunt? What's their sensory range? Pack hunters or solitary? What's the evolutionary timeline? When did they stop being prey? What did they eat before they made it to space?" She paused. "Are any of them obligate carnivores, or have they transitioned to synthesized nutrition?" The room was very quiet. Darien looked at his aide, Consultation Officer Revik, whose species communicated secondary emotions through chromatophores. Revik had gone a pale, puzzled yellow. "These are—" Darien chose his words carefully. "Unusual questions for a first orientation. Are they?" Lyra leaned back, seeming to realize something. "Sorry, I'm asking because I want to understand the threat landscape. What's actually dangerous? What's dangerous but manageable? What just looks dangerous?" A small pause. "On Earth, we have a saying. The snake that rattles is less dangerous than the one that doesn't. I'm trying to figure out what's rattling." Darien set down his presentation notes. He had the distinct, unfamiliar sensation of being assessed. She was not what they had prepared for. The consensus had prepared for one of 2 things: awe or aggression. Every species arrived as one or the other. The awe species came wide-eyed and compliant, grateful to be included, shaped easily into productive members of the galactic community. The aggression species came bristling, required careful containment, eventually settled into a resentful but functional cooperation. Lyra was neither. She was curious in a way that felt almost predatory itself, not threatening, but relentless, a forward-leaning attention that logged everything and released nothing. In the first week, she asked the Vel Agricultural Ministry why they hadn't adapted their soil rotation cycles to account for the mineral depletion patterns in the 3rd-generation colony soil. She asked the Krethval military liaison why their fleet formations assumed 3-dimensional attack vectors when their enemies consistently attacked on the horizontal plane. She asked the consensus archivists why the historical records of 6 species pre-space periods were filed under primitive eras when the complexity of their pre-industrial civilizations suggested the label was inaccurate. Every question was polite. Every question landed like a diagnostic tool pressed to a nerve. Darien, assigned as her permanent guide, started keeping notes. "You said humans are a young species," Lyra said one evening. They were in the observation deck of the Unbroken Meridian, watching the slow drift of the Varith Nebula through the transparisteel hull. "How young? By consensus standards?" Darien considered. "You achieved spaceflight approximately 400 years ago. The youngest current consensus member achieved it 900 years prior. The eldest, the Vel, some 40,000 years ago. And you still invited us to the table." The invitation was— He paused. "This was, technically, not in the briefing materials." "Debated." I assumed. She was quiet for a moment, watching the nebula. "What was the argument for?" "Several arguments." He found himself answering honestly, which was not his habit with new envoys. Something about the way she asked made evasion feel like the wrong tool. "Your species' adaptability. Your rate of technological adoption. Your biological profile." The apex predator thing. Among other factors, Lyra made a soft sound that Darian had cataloged over the past week as the human expression of dry amusement. We're not, you know, apex predators. Not cleanly. We're somewhere complicated. Darian looked at her. Your species sits at the top of your planet's food chain. Situationally. Historically, we were prey. Big cats. Pack hunters. Things that were faster and stronger and had better senses. She kept looking at the nebula. We didn't beat them by being better predators. We beat them by being weird. Sweating. We can cool ourselves running while other animals overheat. Throwing things, a uniquely human arm motion, turns out. Social memory. We could share information across generations before we had writing. We have this thing called persistence hunting where we just follow something until it's too exhausted to run anymore. Darian was very still. You hunted by endurance. We hunted by not stopping. She glanced at him. We're not the fastest. Not the strongest. Terrible night vision. Honestly, pretty fragile skeletons. But we are extraordinarily difficult to convince to give up. He thought about every question she had asked in 7 days. The way she followed threads of inquiry through 3 separate ministries without losing the original thread. The way she had, quietly, in the margins of 3 diplomatic meetings, identified 2 potential points of consensus policy failure and drafted proposed solutions before anyone had acknowledged the problems. Is that why you asked which predators? He said slowly. Partly. She turned from the window. I've also met most of them now. The Krethval are ambush hunters. They're dangerous when you don't see them coming. The San are pack instinct dominant. They escalate when they sense hesitation. The Maveth are territorial. They're fine if you don't crowd them. She picked up her tea, considered it. None of them scare me. Darian thought about how to respond to that. May I ask what would, he said. Lyra considered the question genuinely, in the way she considered everything, fully, without performance. Something patient, she said finally. Something that plans across generations. Something that loses and learns instead of losing and stopping. She looked at him with the clear, calm eyes of a species that had looked up at night skies for 100,000 years and named every star it saw. Something that's been prey before and remembers what that felt like and decided, very deliberately, never to be again. The observation deck hummed softly around them. That, Darian said carefully, sounds very much like a description of humanity. Yes, Lyra agreed pleasantly. It does. The Consensus Security Council met 3 weeks after the human envoy's arrival. The agenda item, filed under routine review, was the standard evaluation of a new member species threat classification. The consensus maintained 5 tiers, from negligible to managed to strategic, and the filing typically took 40 minutes. The Vel representative, Darian, submitted his report in writing. It was 7 pages. The council had never received a written report on a new species before. He classified humanity as unclassified, pending further observation, which was not a tier that had previously existed. The council requested clarification. He submitted a second document, which contained, among other things, the following observations. The human envoy, in her first 30 days aboard consensus facilities, identified 14 points of institutional inefficiency, 3 latent security vulnerabilities, 2 outdated treaty frameworks, and 1 factual error in the consensus historical archive that had persisted for 600 years. She raised none of these as criticisms. She raised all of them as questions. When asked what she feared, she described her own species. She was not being self-deprecating. The council sat with this for a long time. The Krethval representative, whose species had made their bones on the galactic stage by ending 3 wars in 4 centuries, leaned toward the Vel. Is she dangerous? He asked. Darian thought about 7 days of questions. About persistence hunting and throwing and the specific human capacity for following something until it had nowhere left to run. I think, he said, she is the least dangerous human I have encountered. You have encountered only one human. Yes. He folded his hands on the table. I'm aware. The council voted to extend the human envoy's residency, upgrade her access tier, and quietly assign the consensus most senior intelligence analyst to review the 14 efficiency points she had raised. The analyst came back in 2 weeks. 13 of the 14 were immediately actionable. The 14th would require restructuring a 600-year-old consensus treaty framework. They began restructuring it the following month. Lyra, when Darian informed her of the treaty review, looked up from the agricultural soil rotation proposal she had been drafting for the third-generation colony on Veth Minor. "Oh," she said. "Good." Then she went back to the proposal. Darian stood in her doorway for a moment. "You knew they would act on it," he said. She didn't look up. "I knew they'd act on most of it." "How?" She did look up then, briefly, with that expression he still hadn't fully cataloged. The one that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite something else and lived in the space between the two. "Because I asked the right questions," she said. "And I didn't stop asking them." She returned to her work. "That's the thing about the right questions. They're very hard to ignore. You can dismiss an argument. You can ignore an accusation. But a good question just." She turned a page. "Sits there, waiting." Darian looked at the human sitting in a room 40 light-years from her home planet, rewriting agricultural policy for a species she had met a month ago, with 17 more documents open on her desk and the patient, particular focus of something that had learned, long ago, not to stop. He thought about what she had said on the observation deck. Something that loses and learns. Something that's been prey and remembers and decided never to be again. He updated his report. Under threat classification, he wrote one word. Inevitable. Then, after a moment, he added a second. Friendly. He decided both were necessary. He decided neither was sufficient. He submitted it anyway, and went to see what other questions she had.